UJ-26. Bober long-range drones successfully struck a Russian Su-30 fighter aircraft, along with radars and a Pantsir-S air defense system in Crimea. The Defense Intelligence of Ukraine released footage of the operation. During the night of July 1st, the intelligence agency deployed an upgraded version of the UJ-26 Bober drone, featuring a thermal imaging camera and the ability for manual control. The drones, armed with warheads weighing several dozen kilograms, completely destroyed the enemy Pantsir-S air defense system and disabled the Nioby-SV, Pechora-3, and Protivnik-GE radars, which supported surveillance for other air defense units. Following the neutralization of the enemy's air defense, one of the drones penetrated the military airbase in Saki and struck near a Su-30 fighter jet. The Defense Intelligence of Ukraine did not provide objective confirmation after the strike, but the warhead's power was likely sufficient to damage the aircraft with debris. A detailed examination of the footage shows equipment and personnel fleeing near the aircraft. Considering that the pilot's canopy is open, this may indicate preparations for takeoff, possibly an attempt to move the jet out of harm's way. The Saki military airbase is one of the key air bases on the Crimean Peninsula for Russian aviation. Until 2014, it served as a base for the Ukrainian armed forces. Today, it is home to the 43rd Fighter Aviation Regiment of the Russian Aerospace Forces. This airbase regularly hosts multi-role Su-30 SM fighter jets, supersonic Su-24 MMR bombers, and other aircraft that, among other roles, carry out strikes against Ukraine. Since the full-scale war with Russia began, the Russian base at Saki has been repeatedly targeted by the Ukrainian Defense Forces. One of the most notable incidents occurred in August 2022, when multiple explosions at an ammunition depot resulted in the destruction of at least 8 to 9 combat aircraft. Satellite images confirmed the following losses: 5 Su-24 bombers destroyed, 3 Su-30 SM aircraft destroyed, 1 Su-30 SM fighter aircraft damaged, 3 Su-24 bombers likely damaged. Additionally, secondary explosions caused significant damage to the airfield's equipment storage and infrastructure. Later, in 2024, the Saki airbase was struck by ATACMS ballistic missiles. It is known that Russian ammunition depots, personnel, and surveillance radars located on the site were hit. Russia has deployed 50,000 troops to the area around the city of Sumy, with its forces outnumbering Ukrainian defenders there by roughly 3 to 1, the Wall Street Journal reported on June 29th, citing soldiers fighting on the ground. Russian troops are now positioned just 19 kilometers from Sumy, which has become Moscow's new target, according to the report. Their main strategy is to wear us down through sheer numbers, said Ukraine's Commander-in-Chief Oleksandr Syrsky, referring to the Russians. Syrsky said that over the past year, the front line has expanded by more than 160 kilometers and now stretches over 1,200 kilometers in an arc from the northeast to the south. Russians are testing Ukrainian defenses at various points along the front, then concentrating pressure where they find weakness, as they did near Sumy last month. Earlier this month, Ukraine deployed elite HUR Special Forces units to help stabilize the situation, the WSJ said. Since then, Russian advances near Sumy have largely been halted, and Ukrainian troops have regained some territory. Now we're looking for ways to launch our own offensives and push the enemy back, said Timur, commander of the HUR Special Forces Unit Timur, who has been fighting in the region for several weeks. Kappa, commander of the unit Chimera, said the sheer number of Russian troops remains a serious challenge for the Ukrainian military, but still isn't enough to defeat it. The enemy is losing 300 to 400 troops a day across the region, but they can sustain that level of loss. They keep bringing in reserves, he said. On June 20th, Russian dictator Vladimir Putin threatened that occupying forces could seize the Ukrainian city of Sumy, though, he added, he hadn't yet set such a task. On June 21st, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said the Sumy axis remains one of the hottest sectors of the front. Some 23% of all Russian strikes are reported there, including attacks using North Korean missiles. On June 22nd, Deep State reported that Ukrainian defense forces had retaken the village of Andriivka in Sumy Oblast for the second time. The State Border Guard Service said Russian pressure in the region was easing. Ukraine's Center for Countering Disinformation said Russian troops were abandoning positions in Sumy Oblast due to heavy losses. On June 26th, Syrsky announced that Ukraine's defense forces had halted the Russian advance in the border areas of Sumy Oblast. He said the front line in Sumy has been stabilized. Ukrainian troops are using active defense tactics and liberating settlements near the border. On June 29th, Russian forces shelled the village of Pishchain with artillery. The settlement lies just 1 kilometer from Sumy, Ukrainska Pravda reported, citing a law enforcement source. Russia is expanding the group of forces in the south for an upcoming offensive. Chechen forces are reportedly being prepared for a large-scale offensive in Zaporizhzhia. According to ex-Mariupol mayor advisor Andriy Ushchenko, 15 more trucks with personnel are moving toward Enerhodar, Melitopol, Vasilivka, on top of the 21 previously spotted. A rumor has surfaced in the media claiming that the main goal of Russian President Vladimir Putin is the occupation of Odessa. In reality, the Kremlin's leader seeks the total destruction of Ukraine, according to Andriy Kovalenko, head of the Center for Countering Disinformation at the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine. The Financial Times, quoting an unnamed senior European official, reported that Russia's current primary objective is the capture of Odessa, a city Putin considers historically Russian. Without Odessa, Ukraine would lose access to its main port. These publications about Putin planning to occupy something, that's something. Putin actually wants to completely destroy Ukraine, but he can wish for anything he wants. There is no point in writing about his plans to occupy Odessa or anything else. He can plan all he wants, but he won't succeed, Kovalenko emphasized. He added that Ukraine, for its part, is planning the destruction of Putin's regime. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky earlier warned that Russia is planning to occupy Odessa. According to the head of state, after capturing the city, Moscow aims to reach the borders with Moldova and Romania. The analytical group of the Center for Human Rights in Armed Conflict has recreated the murder of Ukrainian prisoners in Olenivka and determined the involvement of the Russian military in it. The details of the investigation were published on the Center for Human Rights in Armed Conflict's website. Investigators conducted a detailed analysis of the tragedy in the Olenivka prison, where 40 Ukrainian prisoners of war were killed in July 2022, including many Azov Regiment soldiers who had left Azovstal. Russian propagandists were the first to announce the mass deaths, accusing the Ukrainian side of striking the prison with a HIMARS missile system. However, CHRC researchers, having analyzed available videos, photos, and testimonies of the prisoners, found that the explosions in the so-called Barracks 200 were the result of a planned Russian operation with cannon artillery shells used by the Russian military. 4 explosions were recorded. First, 2 outside the barracks, and then 2 almost simultaneous explosions inside. The survivors described the first explosion as being quite distant from the barracks. It did not leave a visible crater and caused only minor damage to the prison buildings and other structures. A munition with limited explosive power likely caused this explosion. According to the prisoners of war, the second explosion occurred much closer to the barracks. It shattered several windows, and the shrapnel hit the corrugated tin sheets of the barracks. Although there are various interpretations of the 2 explosions outside the barracks, only one fully explains all the available evidence. Target practice, using low-explosive projectiles, adjusted by UAVs. After the first projectile landed far from the barracks, the second landed much closer, and then 2 high-explosive fragmentation shells hit the barracks almost simultaneously. The first shell to hit the barracks pierced the outer roof and inner ceiling and exploded when it hit the concrete column to the right of the entrance gate. 3D modeling helped to identify the trajectories of the shells hitting the barracks. The angle of impact and trajectory of the shell point to the area of the Russian-occupied village of Lyubivka, 2 to 8 kilometers from the prison, where the artillery units that carried out the attack could have been located. Investigators concluded that the debris found at the scene most closely resembled cannon artillery ammunition, not HIMARS missiles or other types of shells. Experts estimate that the explosive power of the explosions corresponded to that of 152 to 155 millimeter high explosive fragmentation shells. The explosions threw heavy concrete and metal objects several meters away. A distinctive feature of the explosions in Barracks 200 was the intense thermal impact on the prisoners and the interior of the barracks. The small presence of flammable materials in the barracks indicates that the exploded ammunition had an extremely short-term and high-temperature impact that caused the fire in the barracks. This is typical of thermobaric munitions. Investigators have ruled out the possibility of improvised explosive devices or incendiary munitions. Of the three types of projectiles that match the parameters of the shells, thermobaric grenades, anti-tank guided missiles, and artillery ammunition, artillery shells have the most similarities to the available evidence. The only other projectile that fits the description of the damage is the 120mm thermobaric high-explosive fragmentation projectile ZOF-74, which is used in the Russian Federation. The Russian Federation developed it for the Nona family of rifled mortars. The analytical group concluded that the direct organizers of the attack were representatives of the Ministry of Defense and the Russian Armed Forces Command, who coordinated with the Federal Penitentiary Service. The attack was organized on the spot by a group from the Joint Center for Control and Coordination, JCCC, which had visited the prison before the attack and was likely present on July 29th and in the subsequent days. After the FPS transferred 200 prisoners of war to a hastily constructed Barrack 200, a group of 10 to 14 experienced military personnel equipped with two A51/60/80/80-1 self-propelled artillery systems and a UAV system fired at the barrack. The sound of fire from Grad multiple rocket launchers accompanied the shelling. First, two correctional shells, training or smoke shells, fell, and a minute later, two ZOF-74 shells hit the barracks. The first one near the entrance gate, the second one hit the northern wall above the roof. Most likely, the group belonged to units of the Russian armed forces, equipped with appropriate artillery systems which were stationed nearby. In particular, the 61st and 155th Marine Brigades, as well as the 11th Guards Motorized Rifle Regiment, fit this description. The cover-up activities involved high-ranking members of Moscow's military, the Investigative Committee of the Russian Federation, FSIN officers, representatives of the Joint Center for Control and Coordination, and officials of the so-called DPR. In total, at least 24 people were involved in the planning and execution of the attack, and several dozen were involved in the cover-up activities. The idea of shelling Barracks 200 with cannon artillery probably arose from an order to stage the killing of prisoners by Western weapons. The choice of mortar systems and thermobaric ammunition was made because of their power, accuracy, and availability. The simultaneous impact of two shells was planned to imitate the effect of HIMARS missiles and complicate the assessment of damage. The eastern direction of the attack was chosen because it was safer and more secretive, as well as less clear to external observers.
Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe. Also, if you want to support Warthog Defense, please become our member and get early access to new videos, exclusive members-only videos, and become administrator in comments section. The membership link is in the description.
Rescues every day. We had a guy last week at 6 rescues in 6 days. You know, he's doing the job every day.